I did take yoga from a person who has always felt like, I think we know who it is, but they were having sex sounds, like they really enjoyed the experience, and it made me very, very uncomfortable.
It is super uncomfortable.
And then I realized that I don't make sex sounds when I teach, but I do make suffering sounds. I'm like, oh!
And as Americans, we're okay with suffering, and we have a lot of issues around sex. Totally.
I was like, I should lay off those, but you know.
I do too, though. I'm trying to empathize.
Yeah,
like I'm showing, like,
hard.
yeah, we should feel some efforting here. But I think not knowing that coming in, you're like, oh, I'm in a yoga class, and I no,
Okay.
you got to know ahead of time and consent to that.
Yeah.
Maybe I wonder, like, where the consent debate issue is in Europe. Is that like, oh, we handled that 40 years ago?
Probably. They probably handled it 40 years ago. And we might have handled it 30 years ago for a day, and now we're back at it.
There was a huge backlash for an entire generation.
So that's so
Obviously, we're talking about Warrior too.
Yeah, we're talking about Warrior 2.
That was clear, right?
Yeah, I'm Jane.
I'm Sarah.
We're yoga posers, and we're talking about Warrior 2. Virabhadrasana B2.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Virabhadra. And was that the name of the warrior that sprung
No.
up?
Yeah, it must have been the name of the warrior who sprung up.
And then the Vira, that's in Virasana, which is hero's pose.
Heroes. Yeah.
Which is interesting, like in a supplication pose, like a kneeling, like a prayer pose.
Yeah.
Is the pose of the hero.
Oh, that makes sense. So there's a humility in it.
Yeah.
And the
Prior to your
Virabhadrasana-
vengeful, bloodlusting
Yeah.
rage attack.
So, yeah, the story is Shiva, who's a god, who's married to Sati, who's a goddess. But the gods, apparently, they got it kind of easy. They basically come home and then they go travel for decades. And then they come home and then they go about their business again and come back. And Shiva didn't present in a way that Sati's dad, Daksha, liked. So he had dreadlocks. He'd wear like a loincloth. He wasn't a respectable son-in-law. And so Daksha was like, this guy's a loser. He's barely
He's
home.
a yogi.
He's a yogi. He's barely home. He doesn't clean his hair. He's got these dreadlocks and he probably smells. So he has a big harvest party and he doesn't invite Shiva and Sati. And Sati's very upset about this because she's a tender-hearted goddess. And so she goes to the party and immolates herself, right? She throws herself on the sacrificial
Bit of an
fire.
overreaction. Woman to woman. Even I'll say that's a little too
It's a little
far.
extreme, right? So she decides,
Does it merit
she's like,
the lack of an
"Shame me.
invite?
You shame me and my husband. I will throw myself on the fire.
And we're joking about it, but obviously these things happen today and they're terrible.
Okay, you take me back out of the comedic thing. Yeah, you're right. Okay,
I'm
so
sorry.
that's
Well, I don't
okay.
want to be like, oh, they were laughing about
Yeah.
immolation when it still happens.
Okay.
And this is a practice which, because of these stories, it's like, oh, this is what women should do. No. Symbolism. We'll take this not literally, but what's the symbolic power of her doing that?
So the warrior is formed by Shiva taking a dreadlock out of his hair and thrown it into the ground. So the dreadlock must be quite firm or magical for it to go through.
It penetrates the earth.
It penetrates the earth and comes out into the celebration as a warrior. And
Virabhadra. He
pulls
comes
the
in
sword back.
arms overhead first, which is
Warrior
war.
1.
Yeah.
And then pulls the sword back, Warrior 2, and then chops off the father-in-law's head, Warrior 3. Does the immolated goddess come back to life somehow?
I'm sure she does, but it's like a soap opera. It's
It is a
in
soap
later
opera.
episodes.
In a later episode,
She's just back.
Yeah. And they decide she brings about forgiveness. She's very compassionate. And then they decide, okay, well, we'll put your father back in order. So they chop off a goat head and stick the goat head on the father-in-law, who then is brought back to life with a goat head. And the goat head symbolizes just a little bit of humility and teaches him that pride does not work in his favor.
Okay, so after Sati's death, Shiva carried her body around the world and started performing Tandava, the celestial dance of destruction.
Ooh.
And so she reincarnates as the goddess Parvati, who is later reunited with her husband Shiva. It's a foundational myth and Shaivism and Shaktism, two prominent sects of Hinduism. She vows to be reborn to a father she could respect when she chose to immolate herself, which is interesting. She's like, new family, which I think a lot of people do. Even a lot of people who are drawn to the practice, they're like,
you're my family.
I'm going to be reborn and I will come back as a daughter only when there's a father who will respect me. And I think that that's a position of power. And I think we can just take her act of immolation symbolically in that way.
That gets to that whole philosophy that we choose our parents to get the lessons that we need, but that doesn't mean we get to choose easy parents. And I don't know about that.
It's so interesting, that whole thing. Like, well, you chose this incarnation. And nobody says it that way. They're like, you'll feel better because I'm going to tell you that you actually chose this. And I was working with a pain client who felt very deeply that he deserved his pain.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I think some people think deserve because I'm a sinner, because I'm flawed, or it could be I've trashed my body or I haven't done things right, but I deserve the pain. Therefore, the pain will never go.
Right.
And I think it's so interesting to work with some of these very deep assumptions that we have about pain.
The immunity of change, that book we're going through, talks about that as like, why do you hang on to these beliefs? Like, how are they serving you?
You have an assumption that's serving you.
Right.
And if you're a penitent, unworthy, worthless sinner, the self-flagellation of the pain that we hang on to.
Wow. We're going deep pretty quickly.
Yeah. Warrior Two.
Warrior Two.
Simply is a very basic standing pose.
Yeah, it is a standing pose. It's tricky. The big complaints about this one, and I run into some of my people I'm teaching who are strong. They're in Warrior Two and they're like, get me out of here. My quads are killing me. Mm-hmm. It's too much work. And then it can get really gunky in the shoulders. You'll see people really uncomfortable in the shoulders. And often you'll see them lunging forward, leaning forward in the pose.
Common misalignments lead to these common complaints. And I think when you have these complaints, it is a signal that you're not optimally aligned in the pose. So certainly the thigh burn, the excessive use of the hip flexor and excessive use of the front leg to the neglect of the back, hip crease sensation, improper alignment, still trying to use the old cueing of square your hips, knee sensation because the knee's not properly centered, which is related to the action of the hip, the difficulty in accessing that because of the weakness of our hip extensors. And again, that effort in squaring the hip can often misalign the knee. Top of the shoulders from holding your arms up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Using your neck and your traps to hold your arms up. That's a lot of work.
And then either the reluctance to take a long stance or the people who take a really long stance, when you ask for that much hip abduction, that much opening to the leg, you're going to get a lot of anterior tilt, which could lead to some low back pain, some hip pain.
Right.
So
people will have back pain in this, and I think most of it has to do with the fact that they're trying to be in this pose beyond what their hip is offering.
For sure. And because it's a hip opener, the body's reluctant to open the hip because they're like, hey, these muscles, you need them at this other length because you mostly just sit and watch Netflix.
Right.
So I'm not going to stretch them, but I will yield in the parts that are much more flexible, which tend to be that low back into that overarching, or the pelvis into too much tucking or not enough.
In the low belly.
Right. Just kind of hanging out in the pose. And hanging out is not a great way to do this pose.
So Sarah and I started our yoga training together, and we started with a really thorough training. We would have to tell them exactly how many degrees our foot would be turned out and where it would touch with what. And that was really helpful foundational stuff. It was really good to have that base. For the open hip poses, traditionally, take a wide-legged stance facing the long edge of the mat and reach your arms out where the break of the wrist is. I would put the ankles. Mm-hmm. That's kind of a good rule of thumb. And then you're going to...
For 40 and under. Age 40 and under, let's go ahead and try that.
So long as it feels like your legs aren't going to slide wide, right? You always want to feel that you can pull your legs into the midline so that you're not thinking, this is really dangerous. You could slip out from under me.
And that's clean hip abduction. If you don't even turn your leg out, but you just start by widening your feet, that's hip abduction, which is like abduct a child, and to take a child away. So that's how we remember it's abduction. And when we bring the legs back together, that's
We're adding them.
we're adding them, ADD, adduction. It's really important for especially a yoga teacher, but then to help clarify to your students, we want this opening. And when you open the legs, the hips sit into the socket, the pelvis compacts a bit. But even before we get to turning the front leg out, turning the back foot in, bending into the knee, what often happens is the inner thighs have to stretch. And because they don't want to, I'm sitting here with my legs crossed and then my lower legs are twisted around again.
Yeah.
So
Get them tight.
Get them really locked in tight here. So when those muscles don't yield, it's easier for the pelvis to spill forward into an anterior tilt. The top of the pelvis is moving forward, some low back arch, and then the knees collapse in, and then the inner arches of the foot pronate, so that foot collapses in, and so this wide stance can then feel unstable, which is one of the complaints, because you're not using any of the hip stabilizers, and you've dropped your core, you've dropped your front core.
You know, this reminds me of one of the nice tricks you can do with a strap is you can get the strap, if you have long enough strap, create a loop as long as your stance, so the strap's going from foot to foot as you're standing, and you can try to burst the strap.
So you're standing on the strap.
Yeah, you're in the loop of a strap, but it's just as long as your stance, and then you just try to burst the strap, and what it'll do is it really helps the abduction, right? And you can feel it from like the inner groin out. And it gives you that sense of how active the legs can be. And it's really nice when the legs are that active because it just feels so much more stable.
Right. So you're almost setting up the pose in Prasarita Padottanasana without the forward fold. Right. We're just saying, can you get a clean abduction? And I would add to this, I love the foot action. And I would do that so religiously in my yoga practice that I would supinate and just feel a strong stretch in my outer ankles. So be careful of that. Don't do that. The top of the foot faces the ceiling. It's not rolling in and it's not rolling out. And then soften the knees and burst the knees out. Like you're riding a wide pony. And so you really want to take those knees apart. And then you zip up. And then the tailbone naturally sort of drops. You're not driving the tail down.
Space for it.
Well, now you're stable.
Yeah.
Now you can sustain that typical 5-foot-long stance that's traditional and idealized in this shape.
Right. And then what I like to do is I like to see what kind of hip range of motion I actually have. So I'll take the front foot that I'm going to work on and I'll stay on the heel, lift up the toes, and just try to spin the leg externally, rotate the leg externally, and see how far it goes. Because eventually we're going to want the front foot facing the short edge of the mat. And my leg sometimes is not going to really do that, right? It's not going to do that with my hip square, which is where we get out of the hip square cueing, right? So
and can we just underscore that with like fireworks?
Yeah.
That anatomically, when she's spinning that foot out, she said it so clearly, you spin the whole leg from the hip, and you can soften your knee to do that. And being on the heel is a great way to do that. Anatomically neutral is only 45 degrees.
Right.
So you're halfway to go to get to 90. You're still not turned out 90 degrees. That's not going to happen unless your pelvis rotates, which we're advocating, or you just subtly tear away the labrum of your hip. That's your other option.
Yeah. And
which we don't recommend.
We don't recommend that because that's like a really nice bumper cushion in your hip socket. You don't want to do that.
You want to keep that.
Yeah. So that's always really cool for me, is to see what truly is there with this square pelvis. And then I move into the pose and I know I have to adapt my pelvis to be in it. And then you take that back foot and you just kick the heel out a little bit wider, right? And then Sarah, I know you have talked about like changing the stance. So it's not heel to arch always. And it depends on what your body's got, what your body is presenting for the yoga pose that day, where you want your feet. So why don't you talk a little bit about how you adapted that?
The traditional cueing is heel to arch, which I think works for, I would say, generically speaking, most narrow-hipped people whose knees tend to be directly below their hip joints. And then if you get into wider hipped folks, we're going to see that those knees angle in. It's called that Q angle. That Q angle is more pronounced. And so I've found that heel to heel is much better cueing. And then if you get even more into a structural presentation of femoral anteversion or hip anteversion, where structurally the socket of the hip joint
Right.
or the twist of the neck of the femur is such that the knees want to turn in, that what's natural
Yeah,
and
the
more native
genuine
to you.
gait.
For those folks, I would say even bring that back foot a whole footstep, maybe 2 footsteps in front. So they're in a very wide stance. They're not balancing on a balance beam with their feet apart. They're on the railroad tracks. And that's the only way they can do the pose without frying their hip crease.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes so much sense.
So I would just say, okay, we're stepping our feet where, turn the front, da, da, da. If you feel this in your hip crease, raise your hand. Then I'll just come over and help that individual move your foot forward. Does that help? Oh, it does. Great. Don't square your pelvis. Does that help? Great. Oh, but then everyone's like, mental resistance. I'm supposed to square my pelvis.
Yeah. The other thing that I find with my hip that I'm constantly trying to create more space for is if I put my hands on my pelvis, I want that to stay stable as I externally rotate my front leg. And what often happens because of tightness somewhere else is that will tip down. I'll tip my pelvis a little bit, almost like you're going to triangle pose.
So we're saying you're allowed to rotate the pelvis towards the front foot to whatever degree you need to get rid of that sensation. And then she's talking about the height of each pelvic bone, each
Right.
ilium.
So the front drops lower to the
front-
ground and the back rises higher.
And why does it do that?
I feel like that's external rotators.
I think what's happening is when you try to bend your knee more, your hip is also flexing more deeply. And whenever you use those hip flexors, you have the opportunity to tilt the pelvis more anteriorly. That hip point is burying itself deep in the thigh. Maybe we can just show it really quick so people know what we're saying.
It's especially on this leg.
So
which is
Jane
where-
is
so when
stepping
I
out.
fractured, right?
She's doing her fractured hip to show.
And then I like spin the foot out. Get it? And
She's
then
in
when
jeans again, folks, doing yoga. So just let it tilt.
So it does this.
Yes.
And that's when you get the leaning people.
Yeah,
right?
now you can see her torso
And
is
I'm
no
like,
longer
oh my
vertical.
God, this is so miserable. I really want to grab, like I want to get like a hook so I can get my pelvis and like lift it up. Actually, it feels good if you actually grab it and lift it
It
up.
does. It feels so good to grab that hip point and pull it up like she was showing. So you're slowing down the anterior tilt. You're still flexing at the hip and flexing at the knee without collapsing into the hip.
Yeah,
And
it
I was
feels really congested.
I was saying in class today, I was like, there is a part of me that wants to just collapse into things. It's like it's the fainting couch Victorian part of me where I'm like, I do want to be that wispy, always slightly ill person living in dark Scotland or something, on the moors. And I want to be in my fainting couch and I just want to like slide into these shapes. But that gets old. I'd rather feel powerful and strong.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, when I see people in class doing that, I do a couple things. One is I invite them to interweave their fingers and reach them up over their head and try to lengthen the side body and also getting the shoulders a little bit more over the pelvis. I want the shoulders and the ribs stacked over the pelvis. And then if it's still sticky, what I'll do is I'll take that front side and I literally try to pull the pelvis up. I try to pull the ribs up. I try to pull the pelvis up. And I can imagine I have a sandbag right at the top of the thigh by the pelvis. And it's just keeping the thigh grounded. So I'm making space. I'm actually making space in that joint. It feels so good.
Yeah, so you're getting that dual action that we love to talk about, that anchoring, that sinking. Go ahead and sink down into the pose, but then stretch up and lift out at the same time instead of everything sinking.
Yeah. So anyway, we are in that stance, which we've now modified. The front leg rotates externally. The back leg kicks out just a little bit. Typical cueing is heel to arch. Sarah's found, and I agree, more heel to heel is more available for many people's bodies. And then adjusting your stance in a way that keeps the pose feeling really strengthening and powerful, but not
In the joints.
not suffering in the joints.
Not in the joints. I mean, whenever it's in the joint, something's not aligned right for you.
Right.
And even if it doesn't align with the classic cueing, let's get to a safe place
Right.
where the joints are quiet. And then we can see what happens, because you're getting so much resistance. That resistance can be structural. Well, okay, well, then this might be a more permanent stance adjustment for you. Or it could just be the hips are so incredibly tight that you're really getting that yielding in the hip joint,
Right.
which is different than getting a stretch through the leg muscles. In this pose, really, anytime you open your legs, we're looking for an inner thigh stretch. And if you're not feeling it, we're suggesting look at your pelvic tilt,
Right.
look at your pelvic rotation, look at the height of each half of your pelvis,
Yeah.
and balance all that out, and then see like, oh, now you feel a leg stretch.
Right. And I think the front leg, in a perfect world, we're talking about a 90-degree angle where the thigh is parallel to the floor, but that's really going to be dependent upon what length your stance is. And so if you can have a stance that's long enough that allows your thigh to be parallel to the floor, I want the sense that I could pull those legs into the midline at any time. I don't want to ever be rolling to the inner edge of my foot. I don't want my knee to be wobbling back and forth. I want my alignment, in all cases, I want my alignment here to be healthy for the knee, right? So I want the knee over the ankle. And
that means like directly over with a perpendicular shin. So the knee not tilting towards the long edge of the mat, which is the most typical way that the knee will fall inwards.
Yes.
When those hip extensors, those hip abductors are too inactive. The inner thighs really want to grasp and take over and tighten and resist. And the forward tilt of the pelvis makes us lose our abdominal support and the pelvis spills forward. So when all of that's dominating, which is the neurological pattern for most people, is we're really oriented towards hyperactivity of those muscles or a lot of shortness and stiffness in those muscles. And so it has to be this conscious recruiting. If we're using yoga classes to improve our awareness, improve how we move, we have to teach people what are the muscles that open the legs? What are the muscles that externally rotate so that you can touch that part of your body and feel like, oh, are those working?
Yeah.
Or are they really like flaccid?
Yeah, flaccid.
I do, when I'm trying to get use of something, I do use loaded words like flaccid.
It's loaded.
Or unloaded.
Yeah, as the case may be.
Right. So then if we're looking, what are the muscle that adds to the midline? Are those aptly named adductors,
Right.
adductors of the inner thigh? And they assist, and they're very strong, very important muscles, but the muscles that then oppose that are the abductors. So we've got your glute max, we've got your glute medius, TFL is a weak one, and all of those help to take the leg away from the midline. So we want to start to feel those muscles on the side of the pelvis work. Those are gluteal muscles. They're just on the sides of the pelvis. And then we want the deeper stabilizers of the hip, those deep external rotators, which I call the rotator cuff of the hip. It's amazing how much they look like the rotator cuff of the shoulder, the similar kind of alignment. But we want those deep rotators that connect your sit bone generally to the greater trochanter, the part of your femur bone that kind of sticks out and lots of muscles attached there. Those tiny little muscles are postural stabilizers.
Right.
And they center the hip joint in the socket, which most of us are walking around with our hips not centered,
Right.
because of the news, because of the stress of life, and because of how we sit. And it pulls it back into the hip socket, it centers it, and then it generates that rotation.
So it can move easier. Yeah.
Well, so that we're not just sticking our butt back and letting our knee fall in, where those muscles are still elongated and not working very well.
Yeah.
So just touching that part, finding your sit bones underneath your pelvis, and then just wide of them, spin your leg out, spin the leg in. And when it spins out, not only do you feel the muscles contract, you can feel the head of your femur move backwards.
Yeah.
I felt that today. I'd never felt
wanna
that
do it?
before.
You want to
Yeah.
give us a little demonstration? So the sit bones, you should be really friendly with where they are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then here's the sit bone, and then here's the greater trochanter. And so these muscles span there, and they externally rotate. So they contract. This contracts, right?
Yeah.
As I widen, right, this is contracting. And I can feel the thigh bone also moves back.
Right. Thank God we're movement people. That chair really could have done you in.
I can access those deep rotators, but then I'll
Yeah.
fall. Well, this is one of those kneeling chairs. It's an agility test to get into the chair. When that contracts, and then you start to bend into the knee and you zip up as you're doing it, you don't let the pelvis spill forward. Now you're holding the pose from these massively strong hip extensors, hip abductors. These are the powerhouses of standing poses. These need to be in action.
It's not primarily your thigh.
Yes, that main complaint, oh, the top of my thigh is burning. Oh, you mean that hip flexor?
Yeah.
I mean, and of course that muscle is working really hard to stop you from collapsing to the ground. But if that's the only place you feel it, and if there isn't a lightness to the pose, we want strength that feels good. We don't want suffering that feels like you're immolating yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a, I love the way that the information tells you something, right? And so if you're in here and you're like, my quads are killing me, I'm not going to be able to hold this, then what you need to do is think, where else can I make my load lighter? And I can do it in the core, and including the hips and the glutes and all that stuff. Like, I need to do more of the work somewhere other than my thigh.
Right. And then just kind of understanding, like, muscles on one side of the leg do one thing, muscles on the other side do the opposite.
Yeah.
And so if it's too much work on one side, how can you recruit the work on the underside?
Yeah.
And that's where we start to, like, more holistically we're working.
Yeah. Another thing I love to do in this pose is bend and extend their back leg. I want them to find that back leg that they're really grounding. Oh, this is another strap place that's really good. You take the strap, a big loop, long loop, you take your front leg through it, and then it comes to rest right at the hip crease. And then you take your back leg, and the strap is grounding the back leg, so it's underneath your heel, right? So the strap is from underneath your back heel up over your front hip and down, so that when you press back with that back leg, it like settles the head of the femur bone deep in the socket. It's really nice.
And it just anchors you through that back foot.
Yeah.
What a fantastic, fabulous traction use of the strap that you can use in so many poses, Warrior 1, Warrior 2, Pyramid pose, and just getting that back leg, that back heel to work.
Right.
And that back heel, ding, 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 triggers the gluteals.
Yeah.
and it triggers that action, that contraction that we were talking about in that little rotator cuff of the hip. And you can just feel that turn on, and it allows you to glide into that deeper knee flexion. It allows you to sit lower. And one of the analogies that one of my teachers, Doug Keller, has used is that you've got one foot on the dock and you've got one foot on a boat. And now the boat starts to leave away from shore, and you're just keeping the back foot anchored there as you open the legs so that you're never losing that back heel. I don't want to fall off the dock.
Right.
When most people just go completely onto the boat.
Right.
And all the work is in the front leg. So we could talk about weight distribution as being closer to 50-50 in the legs.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit more in the back leg.
Yeah, I would think so. That's what you want.
Yeah.
And that way it's so much more sustainable and enjoyable, right?
Right.
Because when it's all in the front leg, you're going to stay there for a little bit, and then you're going to go to some other pose that's going to ask you to use your quad. Your legs are going to be toast.
And then your knee is going to be toast eventually because, again, it's like underusing some of the stabilizers of the hip, and the knee is that middleman. The knee is in that circle of
management.
Well, and it's like that triangle of friends. If you're in a group of 3 friends, there's that one friend who's the peacemaker, and that's the knee. And then it's that war, the tightness, the restrictions, or the sleepiness, the inactivity of the foot, and then the tightness, sleepiness, inactivity of the hip. And then the knee's left trying to like
find a middle ground
or arrange the entire event, and the other 2 people are like asleep at the wheel. When that quad dominance comes in, those hip flexors are working too strongly. It just really takes it out on the knee eventually.
Yeah. Okay.
And if you're young, you're like, my knees are fine. Well, give it a couple of decades. You'd like to stay in this practice for decades. And when the knee starts suffering in the practice, when the knee starts to complain, like she's the ingenue, she like finally starts to speak up. She's like lighting that match of the immolation. She's like, I'm going to do it.
Right.
Because you're not respecting me.
Right. Oh my God. I think I've lived my life as a knee too often.
Right. I mean, this is our body shows us our, the symbolism of our injuries, and you chose that knee injury.
Didn't it? I'm not fully on board with that.
No, that just seems too much.
Yeah. Although it is handy when I'm looking at all my feelings as a parent. when I realize my job was never to give them the perfect childhood experience, but whatever I did, which was my best, it's their opportunity to learn and grow and evolve from that. So you do the best you can.
We do the best we can. These injuries and these sensations are going to crop up in the poses. And rather than be like, well, I guess this is it, we can, with diligence, reflection, repair. This is what we learn, hopefully, through all our therapy, is like, there will be harm.
Yeah.
And Gabriel says, you're going to get the harm from not doing the practice, and you're going to get harmed from doing the practice. Choose being harmed from doing the practice, because not practicing just to avoid harm involves so much more suffering and misery.
Right.
And the practice brings so much joy and clarity.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes, and this is actually fixable.
Right. Right. And that's the thing. That's why it's so empowering, right? Because it is basically paying attention, seeing what's going on, seeing what else you need to recruit, like how you get everything to support you better. And then when injuries come about, when any kind of disturbance comes around and creates pain, that's information for you to make adaptations.
Yeah. And I invite yoga teachers to really start talking about these things more, because 50% of my class comes in and they're coming to my class because they have a labral tear, because they have femoral acetabular impingement that has gotten worse or was maybe even caused or certainly exacerbated by some old-fashioned cueing in the yoga poses. Yoga needs to keep improving in its cueing so that we don't have flocks of people leaving the practice. This practice needs to be adaptable and sophisticated so that it's respected. Because lots of doctors are saying like, oh, you should go, do yoga. You're pregnant? Try yoga. Well, hopefully have some good alignment and some good support. We do want doctors to say, try yoga. There's all these benefits, but we got to step it up on the movement alignment front so that it really is a safe practice. That if you're coming in for your mental health, you're coming in to reduce anxiety, to sleep better, whatever, you are also not simultaneously walking out with an injured knee or hip.
Okay, so I agree on a couple things. I think yoga offers so many benefits when done well and intelligently. I think, like anything, there are highly skilled practitioners and there are not highly skilled practitioners. I think the market has been flooded with less sophisticated training professionals, right? So, and I think the profession has done some of that by creating this yoga therapy category, which many people argue is what yoga was 30 years ago. Like a good yoga teacher was a yoga therapist now.
That's interesting.
But the way that we practice the therapeutic applications of yoga, what we're trying to accomplish, what we're trying to see, how it can help our nervous system, how it can help how we move through life, how it can inform how we live life, that's what I think yoga teachers used to do before it came to the West.
Maybe.
That's my sense of it.
I would say that I've never met a yoga teacher who didn't want to be a better yoga teacher. And I've never met a yoga teacher who had a student walk in and say, my back is hurting today, or my knee is hurting, where that yoga teacher was like, sorry, you're on your own, or you can't do yoga anymore.
Right.
They all want to help. And I think that there's a hunger for how do I help that student? And there's just a lack of knowledge and there's a lack of training. And we're here to fill that gap.